are in Shiloh, or Shiloh as we say in America. After 40 years in the desert, the Israelites landed in Jericho with Joshua. Joshua sent people out for over 14 years to find the place to house the tabernacle. We are going to see where the tabernacle, the Holy of Holies, the Shekinah glory stood for 369 years. The presence of God was here in Shiloh. And where I want to show you is here's Shiloh in Israel. Here is Jerusalem and Jericho. For 14 years, Joshua was in Jericho, and he found the most perfect place here in Shiloh. This is where the tribes were divided up. The tribes all throughout this land. But you know what? I think I'll show you where we're going. It's going to be wonderful. Shiloh is a very significant place, not only to Israel, the Jewish people, and to us biblically, is that this is where the tabernacle stood for 369 years. 40 years in the desert wandering, trying to get here, and Joshua landed in Jericho for 14 years, looking for the exact place to land the tabernacle. Here in Shiloh is where the tabernacle stood for 369 years. This is where the tribes of Israel were divided up. This is where they told them the territories they would have, all the different tribes, 12 tribes exactly. At the time of that period, there were 2 million people would come here during the feast. They'd come from all over Israel to celebrate the high feast. So you can look over these mountain area here, and it's so close to the time as what it was biblically. You can look and visualize the tribes coming and sitting amongst the mountains, overlooking the tabernacle, wanting to be in the presence of God, because the Shekinah glory was here. That's unbelievably amazing to think that I'm standing where that happened. As you walk around here, you'll find pottery shards galore, because after they would have dinner at the feast, they would break up the plates because they were unclean. So when you pick up a little pottery shard, it's 3,300 years old. There's also a lot of other significant things here, especially people, and I'm going to tell you down there. I am actually standing at the place the tabernacle stood for 369 years, 3,300 years ago. That is unbelievable. As you can see, the outline of the tabernacle still remains, and they're excavating. There's excavators over here every day digging, finding new proof that the Bible is true. The difference between the tabernacle and the tabernacle that original is that the only thing different is that they made the boundaries with stone. These stones are still here. And I'm going to show you, they still have the holes that were hewed in that held the pillars around the tabernacle. The house of God stood right here. This is where God had Shekinah glory. This is where he came to deal with the people, and the high priest would go in on Yom Kippur. And this is where, around this whole valley, is where all the tribes would come for feast, to be part of this tabernacle. The Holy of Holies, there's a square over here, is where archaeologists think that the Holy of Holies stood. This is what the Holy of Holies looked like. It was 2 angels. It was acacia wood with gold around it. It held 3 items. It held 2 sets of the 10 Commandments. The first 10 Commandments were the ones that were crumbled, that Moses did when he came off Mount Sinai and saw the disobedience of the people when they made a golden calf. The second set was the ones that he went back up and came back with the solid set, God telling us what we needed to do to be obedient. The second thing was in there was the rod of Aaron. It was almost like a magic wand. It had did miracles and curses, and it's just a really special thing. It bloomed almond. The third thing that was in there was the pot of manna, and what God provided in the desert for the whole 40 years. But also the manna teaches us about Shabbat, because he only gave manna for 6 days, and on the 7th day was to rest. He provided enough manna. It was a teaching tool for us back then of what Shabbat was. The tabernacle stood right here. The entrance was to the east, which was what was required in the Bible. I'm going to take you down there and show you something else. This is the actual place that the tabernacle stood for 369 years, 3,300 years ago. But where I'm standing is the actual place of the entrance into the tabernacle. This is where the priest Eli would have stood. This is where his sons would have been. Not only that, this is where Hanna came to plead her cause to the high priest, to go into the Holy of Holies, to ask God for a child for her because she was barren. The priest initially thought she was drunk, but then he realized she was just so desperate. After that, Hannah was given a child, Samuel, the prophet Samuel. After a certain age, Hannah brought Samuel back here as she had promised that to give him to be a servant of God, and ended up being the prophet Samuel. Also, this is where Eli's two horrible sons were. I don't know if you remember that story, but you can look it up. But this is the place of all the biblical interesting people. And I hope you guys look at this and realize the Bible's true and God answers prayers. He answered Hannah's prayers and He'll answer yours prayers too. This is an amazing place.